Claire, you're a guest in this kitchen now. In my own house?
The moment my daughter-in-law called me a guest in my own kitchen, I stopped with my hand resting on the casserole dish my late husband Thomas had given me. "Claire, you're a guest in the kitchen now," Madison said calmly. "Please ask before you use things." I looked at my son Ethan, expecting him to laugh, object anything. He lowered his eyes. That silence hurt more than her words. Hours later, unable to sleep, I went downstairs for water. Beneath the dining table, I noticed Madison's dark blue folder. A sheet had slipped halfway out. My name was printed across the top, Claire Bennett. Below it was my home address. Then I saw 3 words that made my hands turn cold: transfer of ownership. Before I tell you what else was inside that folder, if you've ever felt disrespected by someone you trusted, tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. And if stories about family dignity and finding the courage to stand up for yourself mean something to you, please like and subscribe. I'd truly love to have you here for what happened next. 6 weeks earlier, I would have laughed if anyone had told me I would someday feel like an outsider in my own home. Back then, my house still felt like mine. I had lived there for 36 years in a quiet neighborhood outside Columbus, Ohio, where the maple trees turned brilliant orange every October and neighbors still waved from their driveways. Thomas and I bought the place when Ethan was 6. It wasn't impressive. Then 3 bedrooms faded, siding a narrow kitchen with ugly brown cabinets, but we loved it because it was ours. Thomas could fix almost anything. Over the years, he replaced the windows, rebuilt the back deck, added another bedroom, and eventually remodeled the kitchen himself. That kitchen became the heart of our marriage. Thomas and I had spent 28 years running Bennett's Hearth Bakery, a small neighborhood bakery where I handled recipes and customers while Thomas managed the oven suppliers and everything that broke 5 minutes before opening. Even after we retired, we couldn't stop baking. On Sunday mornings, Thomas would stand at our kitchen counter in an old gray apron using the same cast iron skillet he'd owned since before we married. "Good pans are like good marriages, Claire," he'd tell me. "Take care of them and they'll outlive you." I'd roll my eyes every time. Now I would have given anything to hear him say it again. Thomas died 4 years before Ethan and Madison came to stay with me. The grief had been terrible at first. There were mornings when I would pour 2 cups of coffee before remembering there was only one person left to drink them. But eventually I learned how to live alone, not helplessly, alone. There is a difference. The mortgage had been paid off years earlier. Thomas had made sure our finances were organized, and between my retirement savings, Social Security, and what remained from selling the bakery, I lived comfortably. I paid my own bills. I drove myself wherever I needed to go. I maintained the house. I even climbed a ladder to clean the gutters once, although my neighbor nearly had a heart attack when he saw me. I was 68, not incapable. Then Ethan called. It was a Tuesday evening. I was sitting at the kitchen table sorting recipes when his name appeared on my phone. "Hey, Mom." Something in his voice sounded strained. "What happened?" He gave a nervous laugh. "You always know, mothers usually do." He explained that a pipe had burst inside the townhouse he shared with Madison. Water had apparently damaged part of the kitchen flooring and drywall. "The contractor says 6 weeks," Ethan told me. "Maybe less. Where are you staying?" There was a pause. "We haven't figured that out yet." I didn't even let him finish. "You'll stay here. Mom, we don't want to impose. You're my son. It's 6 weeks, not 6 years. I remember saying those words. Sometimes a sentence doesn't become frightening until you look back on it. Ethan arrived with Madison 2 days later. My son was 42 then. He owned a small residential construction company and had always been proud of building something for himself. But that afternoon he looked tired. Madison looked exactly the opposite. She stepped out of their SUV wearing a cream sweater, dark pants, and the polished smile she seemed capable of producing under any circumstance. "Oh, Claire." She hugged me tightly. "You're saving us. You don't need saving. You just need somewhere dry." She laughed. "You have no idea how grateful we are." They brought in suitcases, then boxes, then more boxes. I remember standing on the porch watching Ethan carry a large plastic storage container toward the house. "You two packed a lot for 6 weeks." Madison smiled. "You know me. I like having my things." It seemed reasonable. That was the problem with everything Madison did in the beginning. It always seemed reasonable. For the first week, I enjoyed having them there. The house had been quiet for years, and suddenly I heard footsteps upstairs again. Ethan drank coffee with me before work. Madison sometimes helped prepare dinner. One Saturday morning, I made Ethan cinnamon rolls the way I had when he was a teenager. He ate 2 before Madison came downstairs. "You're spoiling him," she said. "I've been doing it for 42 years. It's probably too late to stop." We all laughed. I remember thinking Thomas would have loved seeing us around the table together. But small things began happening. Nothing alarming. Not yet. Madison would stand in the kitchen and study the room. "This is such a beautiful space. Thomas rebuilt most of it." She ran her fingers across the countertop. "You could update it a little and add serious value. I like it the way it is." "Of course." A few days later, she asked casually, "You don't still have a mortgage on this place, do you?" I looked up from my coffee. "No, we paid it off years ago." Her eyebrows lifted. "That must feel amazing." "It does." She smiled. "You're sitting on a really valuable property, Claire." I laughed. "I don't sit on it. I live in it." She laughed too. At the time, I thought nothing of the question. Then came another. "Have you ever thought about downsizing?" "No." "This is a lot of house for one person. I've got plenty of room. I just mean maintenance. I manage." She quickly touched my arm. "I know, I wasn't saying you couldn't, but she had been. Or at least she had planted the idea." Ethan was usually nearby when these conversations happened, yet he rarely participated. Once I looked at him and said, "Your wife is trying to put me in a condo." He gave me a distracted smile. "She worries about you. I don't need worrying about." "I know, Mom." He kissed my forehead. The subject disappeared. For another week. Then Madison started changing things in the kitchen. At first she reorganized one drawer. Your utensils were all mixed together. They weren't. I had kept them that way for 20 years because I knew exactly where everything was. Still, I thanked her. Then she moved the coffee mugs closer to the machine. Then the flour went into new containers. Then she created a shelf in the refrigerator labeled for meal preparation. Every change came with a smile. Every change was described as help. And every time I felt annoyed, I told myself the same thing. 6 weeks. They're family. Don't make a problem out of nothing. By the 5th week, I started noticing something else. Neither Ethan nor Madison talked about going home. So one evening while we were eating dinner, I asked, "How's the townhouse coming?" Ethan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, only for a second. But I saw it. Madison answered before he could, slowly. "I thought the contractor said 6 weeks. You know contractors." I looked at Ethan. He owned a construction company. That excuse seemed particularly strange coming from his wife. "What exactly is left?" "Drywall," Madison said. "Flooring. Some moisture issues." Ethan kept eating. I waited for him to add something. He didn't. "Another couple of weeks?" I asked. "Probably," Madison said. Then she smiled. "Are you getting tired of us already?" There was humor in her voice, but something underneath it made me uncomfortable. "Of course not." "Good." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Because honestly, Claire, I think having us here is good for you." I frowned. For me, the house feels alive again. I looked toward Ethan. He was staring at his plate. That should have been the moment I asked more questions. Instead, I smiled and let the conversation move on. Later that night, I walked into the kitchen to make tea. Madison was standing alone near the counter measuring one of the cabinet spaces with her phone. "What are you doing?" She turned quickly. "Oh, just curious. About what, these cabinets? They're older than I thought." I looked at the cabinets Thomas had built with his own hands. They're exactly as old as I want them to be. For the first time, Madison's smile tightened, only slightly. Then it returned. "Of course." She put her phone away and walked upstairs. I stood there listening to her footsteps fade. Something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it yet. It wasn't the cabinets. It wasn't the questions about my mortgage. It wasn't even the boxes that seemed excessive for a 6-week stay. It was the way Ethan had stopped looking at me whenever I asked when they were leaving. I placed my hand on the kitchen counter Thomas had installed years before. And for the first time since my son moved back home, a thought entered my mind that made me deeply uncomfortable. Maybe Ethan and Madison weren't waiting for their house to be ready. Maybe they were waiting for me to become comfortable with them staying in mine. The first thing that disappeared was Thomas's cast iron skillet. I noticed it on a Sunday morning. For nearly 30 years, that skillet had lived in the bottom cabinet beside the stove. Thomas used it for bacon, fried potatoes, cornbread, and the ridiculous oversized pancakes he made whenever Ethan had friends sleeping over. After Thomas died, I didn't use it often, but I never moved it. That Sunday I opened the cabinet. It was gone. I checked the drawer beneath the oven, the pantry, even the dishwasher. Nothing. Madison, I called. She appeared in the doorway holding her coffee. "Have you seen Thomas's skillet? The old black one?" "Yes." "I put it in the garage." I stared at her. "Why?" She shrugged. "It was taking up space, Claire. In a cabinet it's so heavy and you barely use it. I thought we could make the kitchen more functional. That word bothered me. I'd like it brought back. Madison blinked, then smiled. Sure. But she didn't bring it back. I eventually found it myself on a shelf in the garage, underneath 2 boxes of Ethan and Madison's belongings. I carried it inside. The weight pulled at my wrist, but I refused to ask for help. Thomas had seasoned that skillet for decades. Its surface was smooth and dark from thousands of meals. To Madison, it was clutter. To me, it was Sunday morning with my husband. That should have been enough reason for it to stay. Over the next several days, other things moved. My coffee mugs were replaced with a matching white set Madison had purchased. The floral dishes Thomas and I bought for our 25th anniversary disappeared from the cabinet. I found them wrapped in newspaper inside a box in the basement. Then I noticed the recipe box was gone. That frightened me more than I expected. It was a small wooden box Thomas had made during our bakery years. Inside were recipes written in my handwriting, his handwriting, my mother's handwriting. Some cards were stained with vanilla or butter. One had a brown fingerprint from the first chocolate cake Ethan helped make when he was 9. I searched every cabinet. Madison. She was sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop. My recipe box is missing. Oh, that. She kept typing. I packed it. I waited. Finally, she looked up. Why, I'm organizing. You packed my recipes. They were taking up counter space. They've been on that counter for 20 years. Her expression softened in that particular way I was beginning to hate. It was the expression people use when they think they're being patient with a child. Claire, I know change can be uncomfortable. I felt heat rise into my face. This isn't about change. You're moving my belongings without asking. I'm trying to help. I didn't ask for help. The room went quiet. Then Ethan walked in. He looked from Madison to me. What's going on? Nothing, Madison said. It isn't nothing, I replied. Madison packed my recipe box without asking. Ethan sighed. Not at Madison, at me. Mom, she's just trying to make things easier. For whom he rubbed the back of his neck. You don't need to handle everything anymore. The words landed strangely. What exactly am I no longer capable of handling? That's not what I meant. It sounded like what you meant. Madison closed her laptop. No one is saying you're incapable. Then she smiled. We're saying you deserve help. That sounded kind. That was what made it dangerous. They could take something away from me and call it help. If I objected suddenly, I was the difficult one, so I stopped arguing. But I started paying attention. Madison began planning every dinner. She created a grocery list and told Ethan what to buy. One afternoon, I reached for chicken in the refrigerator. That's for Thursday, she said. I turned. I was going to make soup. I already planned tacos tonight. I don't want tacos. She laughed lightly. You'll like them. I put the chicken back, not because she had authority over me, because I didn't want another argument. That distinction mattered to me then. Later, I realized it probably didn't matter to Madison. Every time I surrendered something small, she learned how far she could go. Soon I had to search for ingredients in my own pantry. She transferred flour, sugar, rice, and pasta into identical containers. She moved spices alphabetically. She cleared one cabinet completely and filled it with supplements, protein powders, and things she ordered online. One morning, I couldn't find the cinnamon. Top shelf, Madison said. I can't reach that. Oh. She stared at the shelf as if this had never occurred to her. I'll get it for you. No. I dragged over the small step stool. Claire, don't. You could fall. I've been climbing this stool since Ethan was in elementary school. That doesn't mean you should still be doing it. There it was again. Still, as if age had quietly revoked permissions I didn't know required renewal. That evening, Ethan said Madison worries about you. I looked at him across the dinner table. Your wife put something I use every morning where I can't reach it, then used my inability to reach it as evidence that I need help. He frowned. You're overthinking this. Was I? For the first time, I began writing down the things that changed. Not because I believed there was a conspiracy. I simply needed reassurance that I wasn't imagining the pattern. March 8th, skillet moved. March 11th, dishes packed. March 13th, recipe box packed. March 15th, pantry reorganized. March 16th, Madison started ordering groceries without asking. The list grew. Then one afternoon, I heard something I couldn't explain away. I was walking toward the pantry when I heard Madison speaking quietly inside. She was on the phone. No, not yet, she whispered. I stopped. A pause. Then she said, She's adjusting faster than I expected. My hand froze inches from the pantry door. Adjusting to what? Madison laughed softly. No, Ethan's fine. He just hates confrontation. Another pause. I know. I'll handle it. I shifted my weight. The floorboard creaked. Silence. Madison stepped out of the pantry. When she saw me, something flashed across her face, fear. It vanished almost immediately. "Claire, who were you talking to, a friend?" "About me." Her eyebrows rose. "What you said." I was adjusting. For half a second, neither of us moved. Then Madison smiled. "I was talking about you adjusting to having us here. Oh, after living alone so long." She touched my arm. "Actually, I was saying how well you're doing." I looked down at her hand, then back at her. "That's nice." I walked away. I didn't challenge her. I didn't tell Ethan. But that night, I opened the notebook where I had been recording the changes. Under March 18th, I wrote one sentence. Madison said, "She's adjusting faster than I expected." I stared at those words for a long time. Then I closed the notebook and slipped it into my bedside drawer. Until that moment, I had believed Madison was simply controlling. Now I wondered whether the disappearing skillet, the packed dishes, the relocated recipes, and the groceries I was suddenly expected to ask permission to use were connected. Maybe she wasn't reorganizing my kitchen. Maybe she was teaching me one small surrender at a time how to stop thinking of it as mine. The day Madison finally called me a guest was my wedding anniversary. Thomas and I would have been married 44 years. After he died, I developed a private ritual for that day. I didn't visit the cemetery. Thomas had never liked cemeteries. "Don't come talk to a stone when I'm gone," he once told me. "Make something good and remember me at the table." So every anniversary I made his favorite chicken casserole. It wasn't fancy. Chicken mushrooms, onions, cream sauce, herbs, and a breadcrumb topping browned until crisp. We had served a version of it at Bennett's Hearth Bakery during the lunch years. Thomas loved it so much he claimed he married me for the recipe. That afternoon I took his handwritten recipe from the wooden box I had retrieved from the basement and carried it downstairs. The kitchen was empty. For once I felt relieved. I set the recipe beside the stove and opened the refrigerator. The chicken was there. So were the mushrooms. I reached for them. Claire Madison stood behind me. She had come in so quietly that I hadn't heard her. "What are you making?" "Dinner." "I already have dinner planned. I know." She looked at the ingredients. "Then why are you taking those?" "Because I'm making Thomas's casserole." Madison frowned. "The chicken is for tomorrow. I'll buy more. And the mushrooms are for the pasta. I'll buy more mushrooms too." She gave a small sigh. "Claire, we've talked about this. I closed the refrigerator." "No, Madison. You've talked about this." Her expression changed. Only slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means you've created rules for my kitchen without asking me. I'm trying to keep things organized. I don't need you to organize my dinner." She folded her arms. "You've been complaining that you can't find anything. Because you moved everything." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I looked at the recipe card. Thomas's handwriting was faded at the edges. I suddenly felt exhausted by the absurdity of having to defend something so simple. "I make this every anniversary," I said quietly. Madison glanced at the card. "I understand it's sentimental." "No, I don't think you do. I do, Claire. But we can't throw off an entire meal plan every time you feel nostalgic. Every time you feel nostalgic. As if remembering my husband were an inconvenience." I picked up the chicken. "I'm making the casserole." Madison stepped closer. "Please put that back." I actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because for a moment I thought I had misunderstood her. "Excuse me." The groceries were purchased according to a plan. In my refrigerator. With groceries Ethan and I bought in my house. Her jaw tightened. Then she said it, calmly, almost casually. "Claire, you're a guest in the kitchen now. Please ask before you use things." Something inside me went completely still. I looked around the room. At the oak cabinets Thomas had built. At the window we had chosen together. At the little burn mark near the stove from the Thanksgiving when Ethan was 12 and Thomas dropped a hot pan. 36 years of my life surrounded me. And my daughter-in-law had just called me a guest. "In whose kitchen?" I asked. Madison seemed surprised by how quietly I spoke. "I don't mean it literally." "Then explain what you mean." "I mean Ethan and I are handling things now. Who asked you to? We live here too. Temporarily." That word landed between us. Madison's eyes hardened. Before she could answer, Ethan walked in from the garage. He immediately sensed the tension. "What happened?" Madison turned toward him. "Nothing. Your mother is upset because I asked her not to use ingredients I bought for planned meals. That isn't what happened." Ethan looked at me. "What happened, Mom?" "Your wife just told me I'm a guest in my own kitchen." His face changed. For 1 second I saw something there. Embarrassment, maybe guilt. I waited for him to say Madison apologize. He didn't. Madison spoke first. I explained what I meant. I kept my eyes on my son. "Is that what you think too?" "Mom, am I a guest here?" He looked down. That tiny movement broke something in me. Ethan. He rubbed his forehead. Please don't make this bigger than it is. I stared at him. I didn't make it anything. Madison's just trying to make the house easier to manage. For me, for everybody. This house was managed perfectly well before you moved into it. Madison shook her head. This is exactly why conversations with you are becoming difficult. I turned toward her. Conversations with me, you take everything personally. You called me a guest in my home. I said in the kitchen. I almost admired the distinction, as if limiting the territory of my humiliation made it acceptable. Ethan sighed. Can everybody just calm down? I looked at him and suddenly saw the little boy who used to sit on the counter licking frosting from a spoon. I remembered driving him to baseball practice, helping him through college applications, loaning him money for his first truck, holding him after his father died, and now he couldn't say 4 simple words. This is Mom's house. I put the chicken back in the refrigerator. Then I picked up Thomas's recipe. I won't interfere with your meal plan, Mom, Ethan said. I walked past him. Enjoy your kitchen. Upstairs, I closed my bedroom door. I didn't cry immediately. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at a photograph of Thomas on my dresser. It had been taken in that kitchen 8 years earlier. He was holding a pie and grinning because the crust had collapsed. You'd be furious, I whispered. Then the tears came. Not because Madison had insulted me, because Ethan had allowed it. For 4 years after Thomas died, that house had sometimes felt painfully empty. But it had never felt unsafe. That night, for the first time, I locked my bedroom door. I lay awake listening to Ethan and Madison moving downstairs. Eventually, the house became quiet. Around midnight, I gave up trying to sleep. My throat was dry, so I slipped on my robe and went downstairs for water. The lights were off. Moonlight spilled across the dining room floor. I was passing the table when something dark caught my attention. A folder, navy blue. It was partly underneath one of the chairs. I recognized it immediately. Madison carried it frequently, usually tucked inside her large leather bag. I bent down and picked it up. A sheet of paper had slipped halfway out. I intended to push it back in. Then I saw the name printed near the top, Claire Bennett. My fingers stopped. Below my name was my address. I pulled the page slightly farther out. Property valuation, estimated renovation value, proposed transfer. My heartbeat began pounding. Then my eyes found a phrase near the bottom, transfer of ownership. I stood alone in the darkness holding Madison's folder. Suddenly the kitchen argument no longer felt like an argument about chicken, and the word guest no longer sounded accidental. For several seconds I stood perfectly still. The refrigerator hummed behind me. The old clock above the dining room doorway ticked with the same steady rhythm it had kept for years. Everything sounded normal. Nothing felt normal. I should have put the folder down. I knew that. Whatever Madison kept inside it was private. But my name was on those papers. My address was there. And after what she had said in the kitchen, transfer of ownership did not feel like something I could politely ignore. I carried the folder to the dining table and switched on the small lamp. Then I opened it. The first document was a property record for my house. My house. Claire Bennett was listed as the owner. The purchase history lot, size tax information, and other details were printed underneath. I turned the page. The next sheet was a comparative market analysis. I knew enough about real estate to understand what I was seeing. Several nearby houses had been listed beside mine along with their sale prices. Someone had estimated my home's current value. Then there was another number. Projected value after renovation. My stomach tightened. Suddenly, Madison, measuring my kitchen cabinets with her phone, came back to me. She hadn't been curious. She had been calculating. I turned another page. There were renovation estimates for the kitchen bathroom's flooring and exterior. Beside each item was an approximate cost. At the bottom was a projected resale range. I whispered, "What are you doing, Madison?" Of course the empty room didn't answer. The next document did, at least partly. M&B Residential Holdings, LLC. I had never heard the name before. Attached to it was a draft document discussing a proposed transfer of ownership of my property. My hands began trembling. I read it twice because the first time my mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. The plan appeared to involve transferring my home into the LLC. There were sections for signatures. One of them was mine, blank. I stared at that empty line longer than anything else. Claire Bennett, owner, signature signed. No signature, no transfer, not yet. That realization gave me enough control to keep reading. I turned another page. There were notes about financing after the transfer, home equity, collateral, loan estimates, numbers large enough to make my mouth go dry. This wasn't some vague conversation Ethan and Madison had been having about helping me manage the house. Someone had built an actual financial plan around it. My home had become columns and numbers on paper. I thought about Thomas rebuilding the back deck during one brutally hot July. I thought about Ethan carving his initials underneath the basement stairs when he was 13. I thought about Christmas mornings, birthday dinners, Thomas's funeral reception. None of those things appeared on Madison's spreadsheet. Only value, equity, renovation, resale. I nearly closed the folder then, but a yellow sticky note attached to another page caught my attention. There were only a few handwritten words. Claire Sr. living after closing. I felt as though someone had poured ice water down my back. After closing. Not after I became ill. Not if I needed care. After closing. I sat down. For weeks Madison had been telling me the house was too much for one person. She had worried about stairs. She had worried about me climbing a step stool. She had moved things beyond my reach and then pointed out how dangerous reaching for them could be. I had interpreted those moments as condescension. Now I wondered if they had been preparation. Make Claire feel old. Make Claire feel dependent. Make Claire stop deciding things, then offer a solution. I kept searching. Another page contained information about senior communities around Columbus. Monthly costs, amenities, transportation. One had a circle beside it. I had never asked Madison to research senior living for me. I had never told Ethan I wanted to leave my home. Yet apparently they had already begun deciding where I might go. My eyes burned, but I refused to cry. Not yet. I went back to the LLC document, M&B, Madison Bennett perhaps. I photographed the page with my phone, then another and another. Property record, market analysis, renovation estimates, transfer draft, financing notes, senior living information. I photographed everything. My hands became steadier with every picture. Fear was changing into something else. Not anger exactly. Clarity. I had spent weeks questioning myself. Maybe Madison was simply organized. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe Ethan really was worried about me. Maybe I was resisting change because I missed Thomas. But documents didn't smile and tell you that you misunderstood. Numbers didn't call themselves help. Those papers told a much cleaner story. Someone wanted control of my house, and they needed something from me to get it, my signature. I carefully examined every page again. I found no signed deed, no completed transfer, nothing showing that ownership had legally changed. Whatever Madison was planning, she wasn't finished. That mattered. I suddenly remembered something Thomas used to tell me during our bakery years whenever a supplier made a mistake. Don't start yelling until you know what happened. Angry people reveal what they know. Quiet people learn what everyone else knows. Thomas had been better at patience than I was. That night I decided to borrow some of his. I would not confront Madison. Not yet. I would not wake Ethan. Not yet. Instead, I checked the photographs on my phone to make sure every page was readable. Then I returned the documents to exactly the order in which I had found them. I aligned the corners, closed the folder, turned off the lamp. Then I placed it beneath the chair where it had been. Before going upstairs, I stopped at the entrance to the kitchen. In the darkness, I could make out the cabinets Thomas had built. Earlier that evening, Madison's words had humiliated me. "You're a guest in the kitchen now." Now I understood something I hadn't understood then. The kitchen wasn't the destination. It was practice. Every relocated pan, every packed recipe, every meal Madison controlled had pushed me a little farther from believing I had authority in my own home. If I could be taught to surrender the kitchen without fighting, perhaps surrendering the house wouldn't feel so impossible later. I climbed the stairs quietly. When I reached my bedroom, I locked the door. Then I opened my phone and looked again at the photographs. I stopped on the blank signature line. Madison had plans. Ethan might have plans too, but there was one thing neither of them seemed to understand yet. The house was still mine, and now I knew what they were trying to do. The next morning I made coffee as if I had slept perfectly. I hadn't. I had spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation from the previous 6 weeks. At 7:15, Madison entered the kitchen. "Morning, Claire. Morning." I poured coffee into my old blue mug. She stopped. Her eyes moved toward the dining room. Just once, but I noticed. A few minutes later, she walked to the table and picked up the navy folder. She opened it, flipped through several pages, closed it again. Then she looked at me. I buttered my toast. "Sleep okay?" she asked. "Like a rock." That was my first deliberate lie. I didn't enjoy it. But neither did I feel guilty. "Good," she said. She carried the folder upstairs. 20 minutes later, Ethan left for work. Madison followed soon afterward. I waited until both vehicles disappeared before I took out my phone. There was only one person I trusted enough to call. Linda Parker had been my friend for almost 25 years. She was 67, sharp-minded, practical, and completely unimpressed by anyone who tried to intimidate her. Before retiring, she'd spent more than 3 decades working as a paralegal. She answered on the third ring. "Claire, you okay? I need to show you something." My tone must have frightened her. "I'll come over." "No, not here." There was a pause. "Where do you remember the coffee shop near your old office?" "Meet me there in 40 minutes. Linda was already seated when I arrived. I didn't waste time. I handed her my phone. She scrolled through the photographs without speaking. Her expression changed when she reached the transfer document. Then she went back and enlarged one section. "Did you sign anything? No, anything recently? Power of attorney, property documents, financial authorization, number good." That single word allowed me to breathe. What exactly am I looking at? Linda placed the phone on the table. "Planning for stealing my house. Let's not jump ahead. You sound like Thomas." Thomas was usually right. I almost smiled. Linda leaned closer. "Some of this may be preliminary. A draft isn't a completed transaction. But Claire, you need an attorney. I thought you were going to tell me I'm imagining things." "No." Her answer was immediate. "That doesn't mean they've successfully done anything illegal. It means you need to understand exactly what they're preparing." Linda made one phone call. 2 days later, I sat across from Rachel Collins. Rachel was 52 with short brown hair, rimless glasses, and the calm voice of someone accustomed to frightened clients. Her practice focused on elder law and estate planning. I showed her everything. She studied the photographs carefully. Then she asked questions. Who currently owned the property I did? Was there a mortgage? No. Did Ethan have power of attorney? No. Had I signed anything allowing Madison to act on my behalf? Absolutely not. Rachel turned toward her computer. Let's start with the most important fact. She pulled up the county property records. My name appeared on the screen. Claire Bennett. Rachel pointed to it. As of today, this property is yours. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear those words. So they can't sell it. Not without legal authority they currently don't appear to have. What about this LLC? An LLC can own property. But creating an LLC doesn't magically transfer your house into it. She tapped the photograph of the draft. This requires execution. Your signature matters. I looked at the blank line. So I'm safe. Rachel hesitated. For the moment, your title appears intact, but I wouldn't use the word safe yet. My stomach tightened. Why? Because someone has gone to considerable effort. She pointed to the valuation, renovation estimates, and financing notes. This isn't a casual idea discussed over dinner. I knew that already. Hearing an attorney say it made the betrayal heavier. What should I do? First, sign nothing they give you. Second, secure your financial documents. Third, don't provide passwords, identification, tax records, or account access. I wouldn't. Good. And I would not confront them yet. That surprised me. Why not? Because right now you have evidence of preparation. You don't yet know the whole structure of the plan. She paused. Especially your son's involvement. That was the part I had been avoiding. Madison frightened me. Ethan broke my heart. After leaving Rachel's office, I drove home and opened the locked filing cabinet in my bedroom. Thomas had taught me to keep everything. Tax returns, insurance policies, bank statements, property documents. I began reviewing them. Nothing appeared missing. Then I remembered something. Several months earlier, Ethan had asked me which bank held my accounts. At the time, he said he was comparing home equity rates for a construction client. I had thought nothing of it. Now I called my bank. I asked whether anyone had recently made inquiries involving my property. The employee couldn't disclose much over the phone, but she confirmed there had been a general inquiry about possible home equity financing connected to my address. Who made it? I can't give you information about another customer's communication, ma'am. Was it me? No. My fingers tightened around the phone. I called Rachel. She listened quietly. Did your son know enough information about the property to make that inquiry? Yes. Then don't assume Madison is acting alone. The words hurt because they confirmed what I already feared. That evening, Ethan came home around 6. He dropped his keys on the counter and kissed my cheek. Hey, Mom. For a moment, I wanted to grab his shoulders and demand the truth. Instead, I smiled. How was work? Rough. Dinner's at 7. Madison entered a few minutes later carrying groceries. She immediately began putting them away in the cabinets she had reorganized. I watched my son sit at the kitchen island while his wife moved through my kitchen as if she owned it. Maybe Ethan was simply weak. Maybe Madison had convinced him this was somehow for my benefit, or maybe he had looked at the house his father built, calculated its value, and decided his mother's future mattered less than his own financial problems. I didn't know, and Rachel was right. I needed to know before I acted. That night, I moved my property deed, financial records, passport, and Social Security documents into the small fireproof safe in my bedroom. Then I changed the combination. Afterward, I opened the notebook where I'd recorded Madison's changes. Under the last entry, I added another. Home equity inquiry made without me. I stared at the sentence. Then I wrote Ethan may know. Those 3 words were harder to write than anything about Madison, because Madison had married into my family. Ethan was my family, and if my son had helped plan what I found inside that blue folder, then the greatest thing they were trying to take from me wasn't my kitchen. It wasn't even my house. It was the belief that I could trust my own child. Once you discover someone has lied to you, the hardest part isn't finding the truth. It's deciding how much truth you're prepared to survive. For 2 days after my meeting with Rachel, I behaved normally. I ate Madison's carefully planned dinners. I listened to Ethan complain about work. I even thanked Madison when she reorganized another cabinet. But every time one of them mentioned the townhouse, I watched their faces. On Thursday evening, Madison said hopefully the contractor finishes soon. Ethan nodded without looking up. That was when I decided I couldn't wait anymore. The next morning, I called Linda. I need to know what's happening with their townhouse. You want me to help you look? Yes. Are you sure no? Linda understood. That's probably why you should. We started with information anyone could access. I still knew the address. Ethan and Madison had bought the townhouse 5 years earlier in a development about 20 minutes from me. If there had been major water damage, I assumed there might be permits, contractor activity, insurance-related repairs, something. We found nothing obvious. That didn't prove they were lying. But it gave me another reason to look. So I drove there. I told myself I wasn't spying. I was checking a story that had been used to gain access to my home. Still, my hands felt guilty on the steering wheel. When I turned onto their old street, everything looked exactly as I remembered. Same narrow sidewalks, same rows of attached garages, same ornamental trees planted too close together. Then I reached Ethan's address. A red bicycle lay in the driveway. There were flower pots beside the front door. A minivan I had never seen was parked outside. I slowed down. Through the front window, I saw a woman carrying a toddler. For a moment, I thought perhaps Ethan and Madison had rented the place while repairs were being completed. But that made no sense. Who rents a house supposedly damaged badly enough that its owners can't live there? I parked half a block away and called Linda. Someone else is living there. Don't knock. I wasn't going to. You absolutely were considering it. She knew me too well. Come back. We'll check the property records. An hour later, I sat beside Linda at her dining table while she searched public real estate information. She became very quiet. She turned the laptop toward me. There was the townhouse. Under the property history was a recorded sale. I read the date. Then I read it again. Ethan and Madison had sold the townhouse 11 days before they moved into my house. Not after the pipe burst, not during repairs. Before they arrived carrying suitcases and storage boxes. The sale had closed before Ethan called me asking for somewhere to stay. I sat back. They never intended to go back. Linda didn't answer immediately. No, she finally said. I remembered that first afternoon. Madison hugging me. You're saving us, the boxes. Her joke about liking to have her things. Ethan telling me it would only be 6 weeks. All of it rearranged itself in my memory. It hadn't been an emergency. It had been a move, and I had been the only person who didn't know. Why would Ethan lie about something I could easily discover because he didn't expect you to check? That hurt almost as much as the lie itself. I looked again at the sale record. Can we tell how much they got? Linda found the sale price? It wasn't a fortune, but there should have been substantial equity. Where did the money go? I whispered. That Linda said is something Ethan will have to answer. On the drive home, I remembered all those boxes stacked in my garage. Winter clothes, kitchen appliances, office equipment, framed pictures. Madison had even brought a large floor lamp. Who brings a floor lamp for 6 weeks? The signs had been everywhere. I hadn't missed them because I was stupid. I had missed them because I trusted my son. That realization mattered. I refused to let their dishonesty turn my love for Ethan into evidence against my intelligence. When I reached home, Madison's SUV was already in the driveway. I took several breaths before going inside. She was in the kitchen. Of course she was. She had spread paint samples across the island. What are those? Madison smiled. I was thinking this room could use something lighter. You're choosing paint now. Just looking. She held up a pale gray sample. Wouldn't this make the cabinets look more modern? I looked at her. For the first time, I understood how completely she had imagined herself staying. You seem very invested in renovating a house you're leaving soon. Her smile flickered. Well, we live here right now. Right. I took off my coat. How is your townhouse? She barely hesitated. Still a mess. That's unfortunate. The contractor keeps pushing everything back. I looked directly at her. She held my gaze. Madison was good at lying. That frightened me more than if she had looked nervous. Ethan came home shortly afterward. At dinner, I watched him carefully. How was work, I asked. Busy. Any news about your place? His fork stopped, the same tiny pause I'd noticed before. Madison handles most of that. How convenient. He looked up. What does that mean? Nothing. Madison changed the subject. For the rest of dinner, I let them believe I knew nothing. But something inside me had changed. Before, I had still been searching for an innocent explanation. Now there wasn't one. They had sold their home. They had lied to me. They had moved into mine under false pretenses. And Madison had already prepared documents involving my property. After dinner, I went upstairs and added another entry to my notebook. Townhouse sold 11 days before they moved in. Underneath, I wrote, they were never temporary. I had barely closed the notebook when Madison called from downstairs. Claire. I stepped into the hallway. Yes. She stood at the bottom of the staircase looking up at me. She was smiling, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Ethan and I were talking about what we think the three of us should sit down this weekend. My hand tightened around the banister. A family meeting? Exactly. What about Madison glanced toward the living room where Ethan was sitting. Then she looked back at me. Your future. There was something chilling about hearing another person say those words as though my future belonged on their agenda. I forced myself to smile. Saturday, that would be perfect. I returned to my bedroom and quietly locked the door. Then I called Rachel. They want a family meeting. When Saturday? Rachel was silent for a moment. Claire, I think they're about to ask you to sign something. I looked toward the safe where I'd hidden my deed and financial records. 2 days earlier, that possibility would have terrified me. Now it didn't, because Ethan and Madison still believed they were leading me toward a decision. They didn't know I had already discovered the townhouse. They didn't know Rachel had seen the folder. And they didn't know that the woman they had been slowly teaching to surrender control had finally stopped surrendering. Let them ask, I said. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of bright spring sunshine that made everything outside look peaceful. Inside my house, I felt as though I were preparing for an interrogation. Madison had cleaned the living room before breakfast. By 10 o'clock, she had arranged 3 chairs around the coffee table and placed a pitcher of water beside a stack of papers. That stack told me everything I needed to know. This was not a spontaneous family conversation. It had been prepared. I had already spoken with Rachel the previous afternoon. Do not sign anything, she told me. If they give you documents, take them. Tell them your attorney will review everything. What if they ask why I suddenly have an attorney you don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your own property? I repeated those words silently as I walked into the living room. Ethan was sitting on the sofa. Madison occupied the chair beside him. They had left the armchair across from them for me. It felt less like family and more like 2 people presenting a proposal to a client. Coffee, Madison asked. No, thank you. I sat. Ethan rubbed his palms against his jeans. He looked nervous. Madison looked prepared. We wanted to talk because we love you, she began. Whenever someone starts a conversation that way, pay attention to what comes after the word because I'm listening. Madison glanced at Ethan. He took over. Mom, you know I worry about you being here alone. You never worried about it until 6 weeks ago. His expression tightened. I've always worried. You never said so. Madison stepped in. That's partly why we're having this conversation. She leaned forward. This house is a lot for one person. I said nothing. There are stairs, she continued. Maintenance, the yard, snow in winter. I hire someone for the snow. That's not really the point. What is the point? She smiled patiently. We want you somewhere you don't have to worry about any of those things. There it was. I thought about the pages inside the blue folder. Senior living after closing. What exactly are you suggesting? Ethan looked at me. There's a really nice community in Westerville. My stomach tightened. Of course there was. Madison had already circled one. It's not a nursing home, Ethan added quickly. It's independent living. I know what independent living is. They have apartments, Madison said. Meals, activities, transportation, housekeeping. You could try it for a few months. I looked around my living room. Thomas's photograph was on the mantel. My books were on the shelves. The grandfather clock had belonged to my father. Why would I want to? Madison's smile faded slightly. You wouldn't have to manage everything. There was that word again, manage. I'm managing fine. Today, she said. I stared at her. What does that mean? Claire, we're trying to plan ahead. For whose future? Ethan leaned forward. Mom, don't turn this into a fight. I'm asking questions. He looked toward Madison. That small glance told me he needed her to continue. She reached for the papers on the coffee table. We thought we could simplify things. She placed the stack in front of me. I didn't touch it. What is that? Just paperwork. There is no such thing as just paperwork when someone wants your house. Madison opened the first page. This would allow Ethan to help manage the property while you transition. I almost smiled at the word transition. 6 weeks earlier, I would have heard care. Now I heard strategy. Manage it how bills, maintenance, decisions. I already pay my bills. No one is saying you can't. Then why does Ethan need authority? Ethan exhaled sharply. Because if something happens, I'm your son. If something happens, we can discuss appropriate legal arrangements with my attorney. Silence. Madison's eyes changed. Your attorney? Yes. I didn't know you had one. You didn't ask. Ethan sat straighter. Since when do you have an attorney? Since I became an adult. That wasn't exactly an answer, but I wasn't interested in giving him one. Madison pushed another page toward me. This isn't complicated, Claire. I recognized it immediately. Not the exact page from the folder, but the language was familiar. Property authority, transfer provisions. My pulse accelerated, but I kept my face neutral. Where do I sign? Madison's expression brightened. Here and there are a few more pages. I looked at the line, then I deliberately rubbed my eyes. I can't read this tonight. It's 10:30 in the morning, Ethan said. I know what time it is. Madison laughed nervously. We can explain everything. That's not the same as reading it. You can trust Ethan. I looked at my son. For a moment, guilt flashed across his face. I wondered if he knew I had driven past the townhouse. I wondered if he remembered lying to me. I'd like to keep these papers, I said. Madison's hand immediately moved onto the stack. There's really no need. If you want my signature, there is. We can go through them together. I'm taking them upstairs. Her fingers remained on the papers, so did mine. Neither of us moved. Then I said quietly, Is there a reason you don't want me reading them without you? Madison released them. Of course not. I gathered the stack. Ethan looked frustrated. Mom, why don't you trust me? The question hurt, not because I didn't know the answer, because he did. I looked at him for several seconds. I'm starting to ask myself the same question. His face went pale. Madison stood. That's unfair. What is? We've done nothing except try to help you. I rose slowly, holding the papers against my chest. Then you shouldn't be worried about me understanding exactly how you're helping. No one answered. I walked upstairs. Only after I entered my bedroom and locked the door did I allow my hands to shake. I immediately photographed every page. Then I called Rachel. They gave me the documents. Did you sign anything number good? Bring them Monday. I sat on the edge of my bed. Downstairs, I could hear Madison and Ethan arguing in low voices. I couldn't make out every word. Then, Madison's voice rose enough for me to hear one sentence. She's getting suspicious. A moment later, Ethan replied, I told you we were pushing too fast. I closed my eyes. That was the first time I heard my son acknowledge there was something to push. And with those few words, one painful question was finally answered. Ethan wasn't simply standing beside Madison. He was part of the plan. I barely slept Saturday night. Not because I was afraid of Madison anymore. I was afraid of what I would hear if I finally forced Ethan to tell me the truth. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from discovering your child has betrayed you. Anger is almost easier. Anger gives you something to hold, but grief asks you to mourn someone who is still sitting across the dinner table. By Sunday morning, I had made a decision. I needed to speak to Ethan alone. Madison left shortly after 10 to meet a friend. I waited until her SUV disappeared, then found Ethan in the garage. He was sorting tools near his truck. Can we talk? He glanced toward the driveway. Sure, inside. That made him nervous. We sat at the kitchen table. For a few seconds, I studied my son. He looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes I hadn't noticed before. Is your company in trouble? His head lifted. What? Your construction company. Is it in trouble? Why would you ask that? Because I'm asking. He looked away. We've had a rough year. How rough? Mom, business has ups and downs. Did you sell your townhouse because of an up or a down? His face drained of color. That was the moment he understood. You know, I drove past it. Mom, I checked the property records. He leaned back and closed his eyes. You sold it 11 days before you asked to stay here. Silence. There was no burst pipe, was there? No one word. Quiet. Devastating. Why did you lie to me? We needed somewhere to go. You could have told me that. I was embarrassed, so you invented a flood. He rubbed both hands over his face. Madison thought you'd worry. Don't blame Madison for a lie that came out of your mouth. His hands dropped. That hit him. Good. I needed Ethan to understand that whatever influence his wife had, he was still responsible for his own choices. How much trouble are you in? He stared at the table. Finally, he spoke. Last year, I took on 2 developments, I remember. One developer stopped paying halfway through. On the other project, material costs went through the roof. I borrowed to keep crews working because I thought we'd recover when the jobs closed. They didn't. He shook his head. I owe suppliers. There's a business line of credit, taxes, a private loan. How much when? He told me. I felt sick. It was far more than I had imagined. Why didn't you come to me? What was I supposed to say? Dad spent his whole life teaching me to be responsible, and I nearly destroyed my company. Your father taught you to tell the truth, too. Ethan flinched. We sold the townhouse to cover part of it. What happened to the money? Most went to debt, and the rest, living expenses, business expenses. I thought about the home equity inquiry. Then you started looking at my house. He went still. I didn't need another answer. Ethan. Madison had an idea. Of course she did. What idea? He spoke carefully. The house is paid off. There's a lot of equity. My equity. I know. Do you? He looked miserable. Madison said eventually the house would probably come to me anyway. I stared at him. Eventually his face reddened. She didn't mean I know exactly what eventually means. Mom, please. No, finish. He swallowed. She said if we could restructure ownership, we could use part of the equity now. Pay off the high-interest debt, stabilize the company. You could move somewhere easier to maintain, a senior living community. He looked at me sharply. You know about that, I know enough. He stood and walked toward the counter. This sounds worse when you say it like that. Then say it in a way that sounds better. He couldn't. I waited. Finally, he whispered, we thought everyone could benefit. I almost laughed. Everyone, you wouldn't have to maintain this place. I like maintaining this place. You'd have people around. I have people around. You wouldn't have stairs. I am capable of climbing stairs. He turned toward me. I wasn't trying to put you on the street. The fact that he considered that a defense stunned me. So that's the standard. Now, what as long as your mother isn't homeless, everything else is acceptable? That's not what I meant. You were willing to decide where I should live, so you could access money from my house. His eyes filled with shame. I was desperate. For the first time I softened. Not enough to excuse him. Enough to see him. He wasn't some cold stranger. He was my son, terrified of losing the business he had spent years building. But desperation didn't erase choice. You should have told me you were drowning. I couldn't. You could have. I leaned closer. You chose not to. He nodded slowly. Madison kept saying it wasn't really taking anything from you. She said the house was family property. No, it's my property. I know that now. No, Ethan. You knew it then. He looked down. That distinction mattered. What exactly did you agree to? He hesitated. Transferring the house into an LLC, using the property for financing, paying off the debt, and selling maybe later if you liked the senior community. If I liked it, that was the idea. Whose idea? He didn't answer. I knew. Madison, but another question remained. Who owns the LLC? His brow furrowed. Madison set it up. Are you an owner? I thought we both were. Thought. The word caught my attention. And the financing. She handled most of the paperwork. I studied him. Ethan had betrayed me. That truth hadn't changed, but something else was becoming clear. He knew about the plan to use my house. He did not necessarily know every part of Madison's plan. I stood. Thank you for finally telling me. Mom, what happens now? I don't know. Are you going to make us leave? I said I don't know. He looked frightened. Not of homelessness, of consequences. At the doorway I stopped. Ethan, he looked up. Being desperate explains why you were tempted. I paused. It doesn't excuse what you did. He nodded. I went upstairs and closed my bedroom door. For the first time I had the answer I feared most. My son had participated, but I also had a new question. If Ethan only thought he understood the LLC, what exactly had Madison kept from him? The next morning, I carried the documents from our family meeting into Rachel Collins's office. She spent nearly an hour comparing them with the photographs from the blue folder. Then she stopped at one page. Her expression changed. What? Rachel looked up at me. Claire, I think your son may be getting betrayed too. Rachel did not say anything else for almost a minute. She simply placed the page beside the photographs I had taken from Madison's blue folder and began comparing numbers. I sat across from her desk watching her circle figures with a pencil. What did you find? Maybe nothing. I had learned enough by then to distrust that phrase. And maybe Rachel removed her glasses. Maybe Madison's plan is not the same plan your son thinks he agreed to. I felt my stomach tighten. She turned the page toward me. It contained projected financing after the proposed transfer of my house into M&B Residential Holdings. I had seen it before. What am I missing the amount? Rachel wrote Ethan's approximate business debt on a legal pad. I had given her the number he confessed the day before. Then she wrote the proposed loan amount beside it. The second number was substantially larger. Why borrow that much exactly? Renovations. Some funds are allocated for renovation. Even after accounting for those estimates, there's still a significant difference. How significant, she told me. I stared at her. That's not emergency money. No. Rachel pulled another photograph onto her computer screen. Look here. At the bottom of the page was a reference code followed by an abbreviated account notation. I had barely noticed it the first time. Rachel had. This appears to indicate where part of the proceeds would be distributed. To Ethan's company, not according to the supporting document. She brought up another photograph. There it was, an account ending in 4 digits. Beside it was Madison's name, not Ethan's. Not the construction company, Madison Bennett. I leaned back. Could it be their joint account, possibly? So I checked what I legally could from the documents you provided. There's no reference to Ethan as an account holder anywhere in this package. I remembered our conversation. Madison set it up. I thought we both were. Those had been Ethan's words. Thought. How much money was supposed to go there? Rachel pointed to the projected distribution. My mouth went dry. It was enough for someone to start over, very comfortably. What happens after that? That's where this becomes interesting. Rachel pulled out another page from the folder photographs. It contained Madison's handwritten notes. Most were ordinary reminders. Call lender, confirm valuation, review senior community. But near the bottom were 2 words I hadn't understood before. Exit reserve. I looked at Rachel. Exit from what? I can't tell you what she intended personally. I can only tell you how this looks. Tell me, it looks as though the plan was to transfer your property into the LLC, borrow against it, use some proceeds for Ethan's debt and other expenses, then direct a substantial amount somewhere controlled by Madison. And if the house was later sold, there could be additional proceeds depending on liens, loan terms, and ownership structure. I felt anger rising, not explosive anger. Something colder. Madison had convinced my son to help sacrifice my security by telling him they were saving his company. Meanwhile, she appeared to be building security for herself. She was planning to leave him. Rachel raised one hand. We don't know that. I looked again at the words, exit reserve. She was preparing for the possibility. That would be a fairer statement. I thought about Madison's confidence, the paint samples, the measurements, the way she spoke about my future as though it were a logistical inconvenience, and suddenly I wondered whether Ethan had ever truly been her final destination either. Maybe he was simply another bridge. I should have felt satisfaction. After everything Ethan had done, perhaps discovering that Madison was deceiving him should have felt like justice. It didn't. He was still my son. I could be furious with him and still hate knowing someone he trusted might be preparing to betray him. What do I do? Rachel studied me. You have choices. I could tell him. You could. He might not believe me. That's possible. He'll think I'm trying to turn him against his wife. Also possible. I knew Ethan. If I confronted him with an accusation, his shame might turn into defensiveness. He had already admitted enough to understand he'd betrayed me. Learning that Madison had also used him would humiliate him further. I didn't want humiliation. I wanted truth. I need him to see it himself. Rachel nodded slowly. That may be wiser. We spent the next hour organizing everything. The townhouse sale, the LLC documents, the proposed property transfer, the financing plan, the account connected to Madison, the senior living notes. Laid out together, they told a story that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. When I left Rachel's office, I sat in my car for several minutes. My phone buzzed. A text from Madison. Dinner at 6. Don't snack. I'm making something special. I almost laughed. She was still managing my appetite while planning to manage my property. I typed back, sounds good. When I arrived home, Madison was standing in the kitchen stirring sauce. Good day, she asked. Productive. She glanced at me. Where were you running errands? Her eyes stayed on mine a moment longer than necessary. Then she smiled. Ethan said you two talked yesterday. I imagine he did. He's under enormous pressure, I know. I hope you didn't make him feel worse. That sentence almost broke my composure. I told him the truth. Madison turned back toward the stove. Sometimes truth without compassion can be cruel. I stared at her. That's interesting. She looked over her shoulder. What is nothing? Ethan came home shortly afterward. During dinner, I watched them. Madison talked about refinancing his business debt. Ethan listened, trusted, nodded. He had no idea that documents carrying his wife's name suggested a different future. For the first time, I understood exactly how the final confrontation needed to happen. I wasn't going to warn Madison. I wasn't going to accuse her privately. And I wasn't going to rescue Ethan from the consequences of helping her target me. But I would give my son one thing he had denied me: the opportunity to see the truth before someone else decided his future for him. After dinner, I carried my plate to the sink. "Madison," I said, "yes, I've been thinking about those documents." She froze for half a second, then turned toward me. "And I think we should sit down and settle everything properly." Her face brightened. "That's wonderful, Claire. I'd like to do it Thursday, of course, and I'm bringing Rachel Collins." The brightness faded slightly. "Your attorney?" "Yes." Madison recovered quickly. "If that makes you comfortable." "It does," she smiled. "So Thursday then, Thursday." I went upstairs. Behind my locked bedroom door, I opened the photographs again. Then I stopped on the page with Madison's account. For weeks she had believed she was slowly removing me from my own life. On Thursday, I intended to place that blue folder between us, and this time Madison would be the one who didn't know what was coming. Thursday evening, Madison set the dining table as though we were celebrating something. That told me she believed she had already won. There were 4 water glasses, neatly folded napkins, and a small vase of white flowers in the center. The blue folder sat beside Madison's chair. For weeks that folder had frightened me. That night it didn't. At 6:30 the doorbell rang. Rachel Collins stood outside carrying a leather portfolio. "Ready?" she asked quietly. "No." She smiled faintly. "That's usually when people are most careful." I led her inside. Madison greeted her politely, but I saw the tension around her mouth. Ethan looked worse. He knew Rachel's presence meant this was no longer a family conversation. We sat. Madison began immediately. "Claire told us she's ready to move forward. I said I was ready to settle things properly." Madison smiled. "Of course." She opened the blue folder. I watched her remove the documents I had photographed weeks earlier. "Everything is straightforward," she said. "Once Claire signs, Ethan can begin handling the property." Rachel extended her hand. "I'll review anything my client is being asked to sign." My client. Madison's expression tightened. She handed Rachel the papers. For several minutes, the only sound was paper turning. Then Rachel placed the documents down. "Claire," she said, "do you understand that these papers could facilitate transferring control of your property? I do now." Ethan looked at me. "Mom, we explained this." "No." Madison explained it. Madison leaned back. "What exactly are you implying?" I reached into my bag. Then I removed my own copy of the evidence Rachel and I had organized. Finally, I pulled out the original blue folder. Madison stared at it. Her face lost its color. "You went through my things. I found my name inside your things. That's private. My house isn't." Ethan looked between us. "What is happening?" I placed the folder in the middle of the table. "Let's start with the townhouse." Madison's jaw tightened. I turned to Ethan. "You already told me the truth about that." Madison looked sharply at him. "You told her I had to." "No, Ethan. You chose to," I said, for once. Then I faced Madison. "You sold your townhouse 11 days before moving here. There was no burst pipe, no contractor, no 6-week repair." Madison folded her arms. "We were in a difficult financial position." "Then why lie we didn't want to burden you?" I almost laughed. "So instead, you secretly moved into my home permanently." "That wasn't the plan." I opened the folder. "Then let's discuss the plan." I placed the M&B Residential Holdings document on the table. "What is this?" Madison glanced at Rachel. "A holding company. I know what an LLC is. Why was my house supposed to belong to it for financial flexibility?" Whose Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we talked about using the equity." "Yes, Ethan, we did." I looked at Madison. "But that's not all these papers say." I placed the property valuation beside the renovation estimates. "You measured my kitchen cabinets because you were estimating renovations. I was considering improvements to a house you didn't own. Improvements increase value for resale silence." I put the senior living page on top. "Then there's this." Ethan looked down. His face tightened. Madison spoke quickly. "We were researching options. I never asked for options. We were worried about you. You circled a senior community before asking whether I wanted to leave my home. It was preliminary. So was deciding I was a guest in my kitchen preliminary too. Ethan closed his eyes. Madison's face hardened. That comment has been blown completely out of proportion. No, it finally makes sense. Rachel remained silent. She didn't need to defend me. The documents were doing that, I continued. You moved my things, you took over the groceries, you told me what I could cook. You kept suggesting this house was too much for me, because it is. That's my decision. Madison opened her mouth. I raised one hand. I'm not finished. Then I placed the financing projection on the table. Ethan looked at it. We've seen this. Have you? He frowned. I slid the document toward him. What's your total business debt? He looked embarrassed. Mom, just look at the numbers. His eyes moved across the page. Then he looked at Madison. Why is the loan this high? Madison answered immediately. Renovations, fees, reserves. Rachel spoke for the first time. Even accounting for the listed renovation costs, the proposed borrowing materially exceeds the debt figure Ethan provided. Ethan stared at his wife. What reserves? Madison's voice sharpened. Normal reserves. I reached for the final page. This was the moment Rachel and I had prepared for. I slid it toward Ethan. Then perhaps Madison can explain this. He looked down. His expression changed. What is that? Madison didn't answer. Ethan pointed to the account number. Whose account is this? Still nothing. Madison. She reached for the page. He pulled it away. What account is that? Her eyes flashed. It's complicated. No, it's an account number. It was part of the financial structure. Is it yours? She hesitated. That hesitation told him more than any answer could have. Ethan looked at me. I said nothing. He needed to see this himself. Am I on this account? He asked. Madison exhaled. Not currently. His face went blank. Not currently. It was supposed to be temporary. For what protection? Protection from what? She didn't answer. Rachel placed another copy of the handwritten notes beside him. Ethan read them. His finger stopped. Exit reserve. Madison's composure finally cracked. You're all twisting this. I watched Ethan's face. Only days earlier, I had seen shame there when he admitted betraying me. Now I saw something different, shock. He had believed he and Madison were using my home to save themselves together. For the first time, he understood that Madison may have been preparing to save herself alone. Were you planning to leave me? He whispered. Madison pushed back her chair. This is ridiculous. Answer me. I was protecting myself because your business is collapsing. The words exploded across the room. Ethan flinched. Madison seemed to realize what she'd said, but it was too late. I looked at the blue folder between us. For weeks it had contained the plan for my future. Now it held the evidence that was tearing theirs apart. Madison turned toward me. Her polite smile was gone. This is what you wanted, isn't it? No. I met her eyes. I wanted my house. Then I glanced toward Ethan, and I wanted my son to finally see what his choices had brought into it. Madison stood so quickly that her chair scraped across the hardwood floor. For the first time since she had moved into my house, she no longer looked polished. She looked cornered. You had no right to go through that folder. Her voice shook. I remained seated. You had no right to build a financial plan around my home. I was trying to save this family. Ethan stared at her. By creating an account I couldn't access? Madison turned toward him. You weren't handling anything, Ethan. His face changed. What your company was collapsing. Every week there was another bill, another supplier, another excuse. So you decided to hide money from me. I decided somebody had to think ahead. Rachel remained quiet beside me. Madison looked at all three of us and seemed to realize she had lost control of the room. Then anger took over. Fine, you want the truth? Yes, I said. She pointed toward Ethan. He was drowning, I admitted that Ethan said. And your mother was sitting in a paid-off house worth more than enough to solve the problem. My stomach tightened. Sitting in a house, as if I were occupying money that belonged elsewhere. It is my home, I said. Madison laughed bitterly, and eventually it's going to Ethan. No. The word came out quietly. She stopped. No, you assume that. Claire, he's your only child. That doesn't make him the current owner of anything I possess. Ethan lowered his head. Madison didn't. So what were we supposed to do? Watch everything he built disappear while you live alone in 4 bedrooms? There it was. No concern, no careful language, just resentment. I worked for what I have, and Ethan worked too. I never said he didn't. Then help him. Helping my son and surrendering my home are not the same thing. Madison shook her head. You're being selfish. Ethan looked up sharply. Don't. She turned on him. What? Don't call her selfish. I saw the shame on his face. Maybe he finally understood how ugly the argument sounded when spoken aloud. Madison folded her arms. You agreed with me. I agreed to use equity to stabilize the business. You agreed she should move somewhere easier. I did. His voice dropped. And I was wrong. Madison stared at him as though he had betrayed her. Then Ethan held up the page containing the account information. But I never agreed to this. She looked away. What was the money for, I told you? Emergency reserves. Why wasn't my name on the account? Because your creditors, my business creditors, can't just empty your personal account. Rachel finally spoke. More importantly, the documents describe a planned distribution specifically associated with Madison. Madison glared at her. You're her lawyer. Of course you're going to make everything sound criminal. I didn't say it was criminal. Rachel's calmness seemed to anger her more. I said Claire has not authorized the transfer, and therefore these documents do not give you ownership of her property. Madison looked at me. You would really let your son's company fail over paperwork. Stop calling my house paperwork. Her mouth tightened. The house could have been sold after you moved. Silence. Even Madison seemed to realize what she had just admitted. I leaned forward. After I moved, she said nothing. Moved where you know what I mean. No, say it. The senior community. The one I never agreed to, it would have been better for you. And then you would sell my house if necessary. For whom her eyes flicked toward Ethan. That tiny movement answered everything. Rachel closed the folder in front of her. I think we've established enough. Madison laughed. No, apparently Claire has more surprises. She was right, I did. I folded my hands on the table. I updated my estate plan. Ethan looked at me. Madison froze. When she asked, recently, her face hardened. You changed the will because you're angry? I changed my estate plan because I discovered people were treating an inheritance as if I were already dead. Ethan flinched. I hated hurting him. But some truths hurt because they need to. Madison shook her head. This is emotional retaliation. No, this is protection. You can't punish Ethan for being in financial trouble. I'm not. I looked at my son. I'm responding to the fact that he lied to me, moved into my home under false pretenses, and agreed to use property he didn't own. Ethan swallowed. I understand. Madison turned toward him. You understand, yes. Her expression twisted. So that's it. You're choosing her. This isn't about choosing. It absolutely is. No, I said. It stopped being about choosing when you decided my consent was an obstacle to work around. Madison grabbed the blue folder. Rachel placed one hand over it. These documents concern my client's property. We already have copies. Madison released it. I stood. There is one more thing. Ethan looked up. What, you both need to leave? His face went pale. Mom! I will follow the proper legal process. Rachel will make sure everything is handled correctly. Madison stared at me. You're throwing your own son out? I'm ending an arrangement that began with a lie. This is our home, too. The irony was so sharp I almost laughed. No, Madison. I looked directly at her. You are staying in my home. Her face reddened. You're destroying this family. I felt strangely calm. No. I thought about the skillet in the garage, the packed recipes, the senior living brochure, the blank signature line. This family began breaking the moment you both decided my love was something you could convert into equity. Ethan looked as though I'd struck him. Madison grabbed her purse. You'll regret this. I didn't answer. She stormed upstairs. A door slammed. Ethan remained seated. After a long silence, he whispered, I'm sorry. I looked at him. I believe you. Hope appeared in his eyes. Then I finished. But believing you're sorry doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen. He nodded slowly. That evening, I stood alone in my kitchen after everyone had gone upstairs. For months, I had been made to feel smaller inside my own home. Now nothing had physically changed. The same cabinets stood around me, the same countertops, the same walls. But something was different. For the first time in weeks, I opened my refrigerator without wondering whether I needed permission. I took out the chicken, then the mushrooms. And I began making Thomas's casserole, not because it was our anniversary anymore. That day had passed. I made it because I wanted to. And in my house, that was reason enough. The house became quiet again 3 weeks later. Not the peaceful kind of quiet I had known after Thomas died. At first, it was the silence left behind after something had broken. Ethan and Madison moved out according to the legal arrangement Rachel helped me establish. I did not throw their belongings onto the driveway. I did not change the locks while they were at work. I did not humiliate them in front of neighbors. I gave them time to leave, but I gave them no reason to believe the decision was negotiable. Madison barely spoke to me during those weeks. When she did, her words were clipped and cold. Ethan was different. He looked smaller somehow, ashamed. On the final morning, he carried the last box to his truck, then returned to the front door. Mom, I waited. I know saying sorry isn't enough. No, he nodded. I'll call you. I may not answer. His eyes dropped. I understand. Then he left. I changed the locks that afternoon, not as punishment, as a boundary. For several days afterward, I wandered through the rooms, noticing spaces where their belongings had been. The guest bedroom was empty. The bathroom counter was clear. Madison's protein powders were gone from my kitchen. For the first time in months, nothing in the house belonged to someone who thought they had a right to reorganize my life. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I cried. I cried because protecting myself had cost me the version of my son I thought I knew. Linda came over with coffee the following morning. You did the right thing, she said. I know. Knowing doesn't make it painless. No. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That was why I loved Linda. She didn't tell me I should celebrate. She understood that sometimes justice and grief arrive together. Ethan called twice during the first week. I didn't answer. He left one voicemail. I'm not asking for anything, Mom. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. The second week, he didn't call. Then on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, nearly a month after he moved out, my doorbell rang. I looked through the window. Ethan stood on the porch, alone. No suitcase, no box, nothing in his hands. I opened the door but didn't invite him inside immediately. Hi. Hi, Mom. What do you need? The question hurt him. I could see it. Nothing. I waited. Can we talk? I stepped aside. He followed me into the living room. He didn't go near the kitchen. That small detail mattered. We sat across from each other. For several seconds, Ethan stared at his hands. Madison left. I wasn't surprised. When last week? Where did she go? Her sister's place in Cincinnati, I think. You think we're not really talking? I said nothing. She wants a separation. Again, I said nothing. Ethan looked up. You were right. About what? The account. His voice was quiet. She admitted she had been putting together money for herself. I felt no satisfaction. Did she say she planned to leave you? She said she needed an exit if the company failed. The words from the folder returned to me. Exit reserve. Ethan gave a bitter laugh. I guess I was part of the investment strategy too. Don't do that. Do what turn yourself into the victim so you don't have to remember what you did to me. His expression collapsed. I know. Madison deceiving you doesn't erase the fact that you deceived me. I know. This time there was no defensiveness. He looked directly at me. I agreed to lie about the townhouse. Yes. I agreed to move in here because I thought I could eventually convince you. Yes. I asked about borrowing against your house. Yes. His eyes filled. And I let her treat you like you didn't have the right to make decisions in your own home. That one hurt most. Yes. He wiped his face. I turned you into a number on a balance sheet. I had heard many apologies in my life. Most contained explanations. But Ethan wasn't explaining anymore. He was naming what he had done. That mattered. It wasn't enough. But it mattered. What happens with your company? I'm downsizing. He explained that he had sold his newer truck and some equipment he didn't absolutely need. He had closed the office he rented and was working from a smaller space. I've taken subcontracting jobs too. Good. I'll probably be paying debt for years. Then you'll pay it for years. He nodded. I didn't come here for money. I know. How? Because if you had, you'd have mentioned it already. For the first time, he almost smiled. Then he asked, can we ever be okay again? I looked at my son. Part of me wanted to cross the room and hold him. Another part remembered him lowering his eyes when Madison called me a guest. Both parts were real. I don't know. He nodded slowly. But I can tell you what happens next. He waited. You don't have a key to this house. I understand. You don't have access to my accounts, paperwork, passwords, or financial decisions. I understand. You called before coming over, yes, and if I say no, you accept no. I will. I studied him. If we rebuild this relationship, Ethan, it happens because of what you do over time, not because you're my son and think forgiveness is automatic. I know. Do you? He held my gaze. I want to. That was the first answer that felt completely truthful. I walked him to the door. Before leaving, he turned. Mom. Yes, I'm sorry about Dad's casserole. My throat tightened. Of all the things he could have mentioned, he remembered that. So am I. He nodded and stepped onto the porch. Can I call Sunday? You can call. He smiled faintly. I'll take that. After he left, I stood at the window watching him drive away. I hadn't forgiven everything. I hadn't forgotten anything. But for the first time since opening Madison's folder, I felt something other than betrayal when I thought about my son. I felt possibility. Not the possibility of returning to what we had been. That relationship was gone. Maybe it needed to be. What remained was the possibility of building something more honest in its place. And this time, Ethan would not inherit my trust simply because he was my child. He would have to earn it. The first thing I brought back into my kitchen was Thomas's cast iron skillet. It was still sitting on the garage shelf where Madison had put it months earlier. One Saturday morning, I carried it inside with both hands and set it beside the stove. The sound of iron touching the countertop made me smile. "Welcome home," I whispered. It felt ridiculous talking to a skillet. Thomas would have approved. Next came the floral dishes from our 25th anniversary. Then the wooden recipe box. I spent an entire afternoon going through those cards. Some were mine. Some belonged to my mother. Many were Thomas's. His handwriting was terrible, especially when he was in a hurry. Measurements leaned into instructions. Ingredients were crossed out and rewritten. On one card for apple cinnamon cake, he had written more cinnamon. Claire always plays it safe. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Then I cried. That happened often during those weeks. Laughter and grief had stopped feeling like opposites. I began returning things to the places where I wanted them. Not necessarily where they had been before Madison arrived. That distinction became important to me. For a while I thought reclaiming my kitchen meant restoring every object exactly as Thomas had left it. Then one morning I looked at the new coffee maker Madison had purchased. I liked it, so I kept it. I also kept the clear containers she'd bought for flour and sugar because they actually were convenient, but I moved the cinnamon back to a shelf I could reach. I unpacked my old mugs. I donated the matching white set. And I replaced the pale gray paint samples Madison had left behind with a warm cream color I chose myself. The issue had never been change. The issue was consent. There is an enormous difference between changing your life and having someone change it for you. Linda came over to help paint. She wore an old sweatshirt and spent more time criticizing my technique than working. "You're leaving streaks. I ran a bakery, Linda. I wasn't a house painter. Thomas spoiled you." "Yes, he did." She smiled. "And you spoiled him." "That too." We worked all afternoon. When we finished, the kitchen looked brighter. Not newer? Mine. A week later, Linda brought up an idea. "You know what you need. I've learned to fear that question. People. I have people. You have me. I'm delightful, but even I have limits." I laughed. She pointed toward my recipe box. "You spent half your life baking. Why don't you start doing it again? I bake. For yourself. So invite somebody." The idea stayed with me. 2 weeks later, I invited 4 women from the neighborhood over on a Saturday morning. Linda came. So did my neighbor Patricia, who had lost her husband the previous year. Then there was Helen from 3 houses down and Ruth, whom I knew from church. We made cinnamon rolls, or at least we attempted to. Ruth killed the first batch of yeast. Patricia put too much flour in the second. Linda insisted she was supervising despite contributing almost nothing. For 3 hours my kitchen was loud. There was flour on the floor, coffee cups everywhere. Someone burned a tray. And I loved every second. When Patricia left, she hugged me. "I haven't laughed like this in months." That sentence gave me an idea. The following month we did it again, then again. Soon I began calling it Saturday Baking. Nothing formal, no fees, no organization. Just women who needed somewhere to go and something warm to make. Some were widows, some were divorced, some had children living far away. A few simply liked cake. My kitchen became full again. But this time, nobody was taking it from me. They were bringing life into it. Ethan heard about Saturday baking during one of our Sunday phone calls. That sounds like something Dad would have loved. He would have complained about everyone using his good knives. Ethan laughed. For a second, he sounded like the son I remembered. Our relationship was improving slowly, very slowly. He never asked about my will, never mentioned the house, never asked for money. He called before visiting. The first time he came over after our conversation, he stayed only an hour. The second time, he noticed the back porch railing had loosened. "I can fix that if you want. If you want. Not I'll take care of that." I noticed the difference. "Yes," I said. "I'd appreciate it." He returned the next Saturday with his tools. When he finished, he showed me exactly what he'd repaired. "No charge. Don't push your luck." He smiled. A few weeks later, Ethan came over while I was preparing apple cinnamon cake. I heard the front door open after I told him to come in. His footsteps approached the kitchen, then stopped. I looked up. He was standing in the doorway. "Why are you hovering?" He shoved his hands into his pockets. "Can I come in?" The question was so simple that for a moment I couldn't answer. Then I understood. He wasn't asking because he thought he literally needed permission to enter a room. He was telling me he remembered. Madison's voice echoed in my memory. "You're a guest in the kitchen now." Then Ethan's silence. The lowered eyes. The humiliation. All of it was still there. Healing hadn't erased it. It had simply stopped controlling me. "You can," I said. Ethan stepped inside. I pointed toward the table. Sit. The cake needs another 20 minutes. Yes, ma'am. And Ethan. He stopped. I leaned against the counter. Nobody in this house gets to call me a guest again. His expression changed. There was shame there, but also understanding. I know. I nodded. Good. He sat down. I returned to the cake. A few minutes later, he noticed Thomas's skillet beside the stove. You brought Dad's pan back. Of course, he loved that thing, more than some relatives. Ethan laughed. I did too. Outside, afternoon sunlight poured through the kitchen window Thomas had installed years earlier. For months, Madison's presence had made that room feel smaller. Now it seemed larger than I remembered. Not because anything structural had changed, because fear was gone. I finally understood that reclaiming my home wasn't about forcing everything back to the way it had been. I couldn't do that. Thomas was gone. Ethan and I had changed. Trust had changed. I had changed. But change chosen freely was not loss. It was growth. I looked at my son sitting quietly at the table waiting for me to invite him into the next moment rather than assuming it belonged to him. For the first time I saw something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. Maybe Ethan was changing too, not because I rescued him, not because I erased the consequences, because I finally stopped protecting him from them. And perhaps that was the most loving thing I had done for my son in years. A year after I found Madison's blue folder, my kitchen smelled like apple cinnamon and butter. Some things had changed dramatically. Others had become beautifully ordinary again. I was still living in the same house outside Columbus. I still climbed the stairs without assistance. I still paid my own bills, drove my own car, chose my own groceries, and occasionally stood on that little kitchen stool, despite everyone telling me not to. But I wasn't the same woman who had stood silently while Madison told me I was a guest. Saturday baking had become a monthly tradition. Sometimes 6 women came, sometimes 12. Patricia had started bringing her sister. Ruth finally learned how not to kill yeast. Linda continued claiming she was our quality control department, which mostly meant she drank coffee and stole warm cookies. The house was alive again, not because someone had decided I needed company, because I had chosen it. That difference meant everything. Ethan was doing better too. His construction company survived, although not in the form he once imagined. He sold equipment, gave up larger development projects, and returned to smaller renovation jobs. For a while I worried he would see that as failure. Instead, he surprised me. Smaller means I sleep at night, he told me one Sunday. That sounds like success. I'm starting to think so. His divorce from Madison was nearly finalized. I never asked for details. Madison had left Columbus several months earlier. As far as I knew, she had found work in Cincinnati. I didn't hate her. That surprised me. Hatred would have required allowing her to occupy space inside me long after she had lost the right to occupy space inside my home. I wanted no part of that. What I felt instead was distance, and distance I discovered could be peaceful. My relationship with Ethan remained more complicated. We were not what we had been. I no longer believed we should be. Before everything happened, I had trusted him automatically because he was my son. Now trust came in small pieces. He called before visiting. He never asked about my finances. If something needed fixing, he asked whether I wanted his help. When I said no, he accepted it. Those things might sound insignificant. To me, they were evidence. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan arrived while I was making Thomas's apple cinnamon cake. He stopped at the kitchen doorway. "Can I come in?" "You've been asking that for a year, and you still haven't told me to stop. Maybe I enjoy it." He smiled. "Can I come in?" "Yes." He sat at the table while I worked. After a few minutes, he nodded toward a folder on the counter. "Not blue, cream-colored. Is that from Rachel, yes?" His expression became cautious. "I don't need to know." "I know. That was precisely why I decided to tell him." I wiped my hands and sat across from him. "I changed my estate plan." He nodded. "You told me. I never told you how." "You don't have to. I want to." He waited. "You're still included." His eyes widened. "Mom, you don't owe me anything." "No, I don't." I said it gently. "And that's why this conversation is different now." He lowered his eyes. I continued. "You may receive part of what I leave behind, but the house no longer automatically goes to you." He nodded slowly. "Okay, no anger, no argument, no calculation. A portion of my estate will support a local program providing legal and financial guidance to older adults." He looked up. "That sounds like you?" I smiled. "Rachel helped me find the right organization. Because of what happened, partly." I thought about that blank signature line in Madison's folder. I was fortunate. I had Linda. I could afford an attorney. I had records. I knew enough to ask questions. Ethan looked ashamed. "Mom, this isn't about punishing you. I know. Some people don't have anyone telling them not to sign. Some don't realize they're being manipulated until their money or home is gone." He nodded. "If my experience can help somebody recognize it earlier, I want that. I think Dad would be proud." My throat tightened. "I hope so." Silence settled between us. Then Ethan said, "I don't want the house. I studied him. A year ago you did. I know." He didn't defend himself. "I thought inheritance meant something waiting for me, something I was entitled to because I was your son." And now he looked toward Thomas's cast iron skillet. "Now I think I'd rather earn back the part of you that trusted me." For a moment I couldn't speak. There it was, the thing no lawyer could place in a trust. No bank could finance, no LLC could own. Trust. "You're working on it," I said. "Do you think I'll ever get all of it back? I don't know." He nodded. "That's fair." The oven timer rang. I stood and removed the cake. Ethan inhaled dramatically. "That smells like Dad." "No. Your father usually burned the edges. He said that was caramelization. Your father lied." Ethan laughed. So did I. I cut 2 slices and carried them to the table. He waited until I placed one in front of him. A year earlier, that kitchen had become the battlefield where I finally realized my place in my own family was being rewritten without my consent. Now it was simply my kitchen again. My recipe box sat beside the window. Thomas's skillet rested near the stove. Some of Madison's useful containers remained in the pantry. I had learned I didn't need to erase every trace of a painful chapter to prove I had survived it. I only needed to decide what stayed. That applied to people, too. Ethan stayed in my life, but under different terms. Love remained, access changed, forgiveness was growing, boundaries remained firm, and strangely our relationship was becoming more honest than it had been before. I looked around the room Thomas and I had built our life in. For years, I assumed the greatest thing we would leave Ethan was financial security. I had been wrong. A house can be sold, money can disappear. Businesses can fail, but dignity teaches you when to say no. Boundaries teach others how to love you properly. And trust teaches you that being family does not mean being entitled to another person's life. Ethan took another bite of cake. "Mom, yes, more cinnamon than usual." I smiled. "Your father always said I played it safe." I looked toward Thomas's recipe card resting on the counter. Maybe I once had. Not anymore. The house was still mine. The kitchen was mine. My future was mine. And someday, when I was gone, Ethan might inherit something from me. But the most important inheritance would never appear in my will. It would be the lesson we had both learned the hard way. Love without respect becomes entitlement. And real family doesn't take your place away. Real family learns how to honor it. Looking back, I understand that the most dangerous moment wasn't when I found the blue folder. It started much earlier. It started when my skillet disappeared and I told myself it wasn't worth arguing about. When my recipes were packed away and I wondered whether I was being too sensitive. When someone else began deciding what I should eat, where my belongings belonged, and what kind of future would supposedly be better for me. Control rarely introduces itself as control. Sometimes it calls itself help. Sometimes it calls itself concern. And sometimes it comes from people we love. That was the hardest lesson for me. Being family does not give anyone ownership over your money, your home, your decisions, or your dignity. A future inheritance is not a present entitlement. As long as you are capable of making your own choices, those choices belong to you. I also learned that forgiveness and access are 2 different things. I could forgive Ethan without returning his key. I could love him without sharing my passwords. I could rebuild our relationship without pretending he had never betrayed me. Boundaries didn't destroy our family. In the end, boundaries gave us a chance to build a healthier one. And maybe that is what healing really looks like. Not forgetting, not returning to who you were before, but becoming someone who knows that love should never require surrendering yourself. So let me ask you something. What would you have done if someone called you a guest in your own home? Would you have confronted them immediately, or would you have done what I did and quietly found out what was really happening first? Tell me in the comments. I truly want to know how you see it. And if Claire's story reminded you that dignity has no expiration date, please like this video and subscribe. There are more stories here about family betrayal courage and the strength it sometimes takes to finally say, "This is my life, and I still get to decide what happens in it."